deliberations of the members of this House here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Oath or affirmation. Announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, I have received communication from Mr. Rushton Parry, MP, member for Miaru, who has requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the member seeks is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Papers.
The Minister of Finance.
Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 1, the Securities Collective Investment Schemes Bylaws 2023. Paper number 2, the report of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the progress of the proposals to restructure CLICO, BAT, and CIB for the quarter ended December 31st, 2022. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that paper number 2 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is that paper 2 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay paper number 3, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs to the 8th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2021. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Committees.
Member for Tunapuna.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present paper number 1, the 5th report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration on an inquiry into the state's capacity to provide support for victims of domestic violence and family conflicts, with specific focus on the availability of support mechanisms during the COVID-19 pandemic. 3rd session, 2022-2023, 12th Parliament. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Port of Spain South.
I have the honor to present the 5th report of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs on an inquiry into the implementation of a regulatory framework for the development of financial technology, fintech, and e-payments, 3rd session, 2022-2023, 12th Parliament.
Prime Minister's questions.
Member for Naparima.
Madam Speaker, to the Prime Minister, given that the U.S. Department of State 2022 country reports on the human rights practices noted an unacceptable number of unlawful killings by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service due to the slow pace of the judicial process, will the Prime Minister indicate what new initiatives are contemplated to deal with this extremely grave accusation?
Madam Speaker, this question is quite misleading because it refers to unlawful killings without determining that in defense of themselves and the public and facing armed gangs or armed individuals, the police officers may from time to time carry out actions which result in killings. those killings are not unlawful. If the member is referring to extrajudicial killings, meaning that persons dying without a process going through a judicial system, that's another story. And of course, I don't know that there's any accusation where police officers are defending themselves against handguns, assault weapons, and other offensive weapons, and killings occur, Madam Speaker, they are not automatically unlawful. And therefore, the member is misrepresenting our situation. And we do have significant state infrastructure to investigate and to take action where unlawful killings occur.
Member for Naparima.
Would the Prime Minister not agree that in the interest of those police officers that are doing their duties and defending themselves, that an increased use of body cameras would assist police officers in being not wrongfully accused of extrajudicial killings?
Prime Minister.
I'm looking for that in the question, Madam. I'm not seeing it because I don't know, no one is taking any issue with that. That is only one aspect of the operation of the police service, and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, through its commissioner, has made extensive explanations as to who is authorized to use, who is outfitted with cameras and so on, and that's part of normal police operations in 2023.
Member for Naparima.
Would the Prime Minister, his government, not give consideration to increasing the investigative and prosecutorial powers of the Police Complaints Authority, given these accusations?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, we don't operate by VAPs. These matters, if they are required to be reviewed, they are being reviewed or they will be reviewed. In talking about extrajudicial killings, the police service has made public statements as to the conditions under which police officers operate and use force. And when that occurs, Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago has arrangements for determining, and that includes the use of body cameras, and it also includes the investigative work of the PCA.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Given that 3 senior Air Guard pilots have reportedly resigned due to alleged significant management and operational issues, as well as the inexplicable removal of key crime detection equipment within the Air Guard, will the Prime Minister state what immediate steps are being taken to ensure that our aerial defense capabilities are fully operational?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, I presume that this question comes from an article, and the article referring to the resignation of 3 senior Air Guard pilots dated the 5th of February 2023 in the Trinidad Guardian was not factual. These pilots are actually contracted civilian pilots. 1 pilot resigned and 2 other pilots remain operational with the Trinidad and Tobago Air Guard. The Trinidad and Tobago Air Guard is unaware of the removal of any crime reduction equipment at the Air Guard.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Given that this country hosted a regional anti-slavery forum in early February, will the Prime Minister indicate whether our National Reparations Committee is fully constituted, funded, and functioning to give effect to our national policy on reparations?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, as far as I'm aware, the government appointed a reparation committee. It's functional, and whether it is fully funded, that is subjective, and being functional, I presume, Madam Speaker, that it's properly constituted.
Member for Naparima.
Could the Prime Minister indicate who are the members of the National Reparations Committee?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I couldn't recall offhand all of them, but if the member files appropriate notice, I'll let him know. That's been a long time since I've had any interaction with them, so I couldn't say offhand.
Member for Naparima.
Prime Minister, indicate briefly what is our policy, the government's policy on reparations.
Madam Speaker, the policy is that we make the claims, and we are doing so through CARICOM. There's a, excuse me, there's an active response through CARICOM, and Trinidad and Tobago participates in that, and we follow the guidance from the CARICOM on this matter. And we do have our own National Reparations Committee, and we expect that that is effective and sufficient at this time.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable Prime Minister, given the interconnectivity of the global financial system and the potential for financial contagion, will the Prime Minister advise what is the state's exposure, both directly and indirectly, as a result of the Union Bank of Switzerland's bailout of Credit Suisse?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago has not been adversely affected by the recent difficulties faced by Credit Suisse. This is because the government did not have any deposits with Credit Suisse that were threatened by that situation. Credit Suisse has arranged bond financing for the government and recently for Heritage Petroleum, but these are not affected since we are not depositors of Credit Suisse.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Prime Minister, in light of the lead up to the Credit Suisse failing value in its shareholding over the weekend, where we had the Swiss commercial bank depositing or injecting 68 million US last week, and then the weekend we had the bailout by UBS. Does the Prime Minister or does the government have any concerns that any management that may be taking place by Credit Suisse, whether we should be taking any steps to ensure that whatever portfolios they are managing, that it is being done properly?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, we are not, and I don't expect that we will, be interfering with the managers of our portfolio in the HSF, largely because the amount of our exposure to Credit Suisse is very small, and it would be handled by the managers in the normal way. And secondly, the threat and the nervousness of the difficulty faced by Credit Suisse have been considerably ameliorated or removed by the purchase of Credit Suisse by UBS. And that has stabilized the market, and we therefore have no real reason to want to talk to our managers about how they handle our small Credit Suisse portfolio.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, there is a latest development where the U.S. Department of State, they are now investigating both UBS and Credit Suisse officials in terms of potentially evading U.S. sanctions. If the Prime Minister, are you aware of this? And if so, would that also cause any cause for concern with our involvement with Credit Suisse?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, the television news is pretty up-to-date and pretty continuous. So, we have a small exposure, I just said. It is not sufficient to want to take it in the context of anything major beyond the common day-to-day operation of the managers of our portfolio. And what the member just mentioned there is not something that attracts the attention of the government of Trinidad and Tobago to interfere in the portfolio and its management.
Okay. So, member for Chaguanas West, in light of the question and the supplemental question, are you still proceeding with question 5?
My colleague,
Or
Madam
which West?
Speaker.
Yes? Are you still proceeding with question 5?
The response of, I think in light of the response of the Prime Minister to the questions raised, I wish to hereby withdraw the question.
Thank you. and therefore now I'm at Chaguanas West. Question 6.
Yes, Madam Speaker, there is, I don't wish to continue with 6.
Thank you very much. Member for Chaguanas West. Question 7.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, Honorable Prime Minister, given that the 2020 Financial System Stability Assessment Report made several recommendations to improve the resilience of our financial system to shocks and contagion, will the Prime Minister state if the government and the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago have adopted and or implemented any of these recommendations?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago is actively engaged in adopting and or implementing the recommendations of the 2020 Financial Stability Assessment Report. In addition, the IMF recently stated in its 2023 Article 4 consultation concluding statement that our financial system appears sound and resilient, although there are issues that require monitoring, and the IMF welcomed the progress being made by the authorities towards enhancing the resilience of the banking and insurance sectors in line with the recommendations of the said 2020 Financial System Stability Assessment Report.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Prime Minister, would you be in a position to share any of the recommendations or adoption of recommendations tailored specifically with treating with any capital flight between Trinidad and the U.S.?
I'm sure, Madam Speaker, that the member knows that if he wants that kind of information, he can file a question to the Minister of Finance, who will certainly accommodate him with appropriate notice.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, given the importance and relevance of the National Cycling Velodrome and the National Aquatic Center to the cycling and swimming fraternities respectively and the nation, will the Prime Minister inform this House if both entities have been indefinitely closed?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, there is no question of these facilities being indefinitely closed. As a matter of fact, they're not even closed. Recently, there were some issues on a couple of days with the supply of water, and out of an abundance of caution, for 2 or 3 days, the facilities were closed until the supply had been regularized. The facilities were closed temporarily for 48 hours, but has since been reopened. Madam Speaker, this was simply as a result of some water supply issues, and that is now no longer so, and therefore there's no question of the facilities being closed indefinitely.
Member for Couva South.
So, Prime Minister, are you telling this House that the media release that was issued by the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago in relation to both entities being closed indefinitely was not a valid media release that was issued?
Sir?
Madam Speaker, I know of no media release, and I don't trust what the member is telling me. I know there was a sign up saying that the place had been closed, and that was done as soon as there was the issue requiring the cautionary action. The place was not closed indefinitely, and I have been in touch with the spokespersons from the sports company within the last hour, and what I've just given the members and this House is the latest information. It has been reopened since Wednesday the 21st. I suspect the member hasn't been to his constituency with his eyes open since then, but I can tell him, since the 21st, the place has been open.
Member for Couva South.
Prime Minister, based on the fact that you informed the House that this or both facilities was closed as a result of an inconsistent water supply or the lack of a water supply in the area of Balmain, are you in a position to tell this House if that part of the constituency of Couva South has had a full restoration of its water supply.
So, member for Couva South, I rule that question out of order. Member for Orpuch East.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Will the Prime Minister indicate the proposed cost to the people of Trinidad and Tobago associated with the government's decision to join an appeal by the Mexican government over the failed lawsuit involving gun manufacturers in the United States?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, our association with the Mexicans in pursuing this matter at this time has no cost attached to it. It's more of a diplomatic attachment where we are supporting Mexico's actions in the United States courts. As a sovereign nation, we are making our voices heard, and we are standing alongside another sovereign nation that is having the same problem that we have. And it is our benefit that Mexico is doing this, because we all have the same problem. I do not know if in the future we will be required to make any contributions, but at this time we are not required to.
For Orpuch East. Member for Orpuch East.
Thank you very much. Will the Prime Minister identify the lawyer or legal firm that will represent the interests of Trinidad and Tobago in this matter?
Prime Minister.
No, Madam Speaker, we don't have a lawyer representing us. It has been done through our diplomatic channels, and there's no lawyer representing us at this time.
Member for Orpuch East.
Prime Minister, are you confirming that at this time you have know neither the cost nor the lawyer that will represent Trinidad and Tobago in a matter like this? In the US Appeal Court. In the United States Appeal Court.
Madam Speaker, I have said in English, our association with this matter is largely diplomatic, supporting Mexico, who is leading with a matter which is in appeal. So therefore, I don't know what difficulty the member is having about lawyer and cost. At this time, that does not arise. The matter is being dealt with through our foreign ministry as a diplomatic matter, providing diplomatic support. And if it comes to a point where we are required to make other adjustments, then so be it. But at this point in time, our association is not requiring a lawyer and is not carrying a cost.
Member for Orpuch East.
Madam Speaker, is the Prime Minister where this matter will be heard not at the United Nations Assembly, but in a court of law, where you are required as an interested party to have legal representation? Are you aware of that?
Well, at that stage, if we then have to step into the court of law, then we take all necessary actions, Madam Speaker.
You are already in the court.
In which case you are presumed.
Final.
Yes, it is the final.
Final supplement.
Final.
Yes. Prime Minister, in light of your responses to this matter so far, could you assure this country that we will not be represented by the current Attorney General, who will not make any deposition in this matter at an American court again?
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Urgent questions?
Okay, Shalana.
Questions?
Member for Orpuch East.
Very much. Madam Speaker, to the Attorney General. Yes. Will the Attorney General provide this House with an update of his highly publicized meeting with the Director of Public Prosecutions on the ongoing dispute over the issue of resources and performance of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions?
Attorney General.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. There is no ongoing dispute with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions with respect to the issue of resources and performance of the Office of the Director. My meeting with the Director held on Wednesday, the 15th of March, at my office discussed a number of matters relevant to the respective mandates of the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs and the Director of Public Prosecutions Office, and my office's support for the independent remit of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. At the end of a fruitful meeting, the Director and myself agreed then that the subject of our discussions will not be conducted in the public domain. Those discussions are not concluded.
Member for Orukuchi, please.
Mr. Attorney General, in light of the fact that the taxpayer, the public, pays the $600,000 monthly rental for that building at Park and Henry Street, could you indicate whether the DPP's office or any government office will be established at that property in the foreseeable future?
Attorney General.
May I repeat the last part of the answer just given? At the end of a fruitful meeting, the Director and myself agreed then that the subject of our discussions will not be conducted in the public domain.
Madam Speaker, to the Attorney General, are you saying on behalf of the DPP that matters like these ought not to you ought not to inform the public as to a matter involving the rental of accommodation for $21 million ought not to be discussed in the public, and the public ought not to know the details of such a matter? Is that your response?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My response is in two parts. The discussions are not concluded, and secondly, I do not purport now or hereafter to speak on behalf of the Director.
Business, private members' business, motion.
Member for Chaguanas East. Members. Member for Naparima. Member for Kuva South. The Prime Minister and other members on this side. The member who has my audience now is the member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is the responsibility of the government to ensure the well-being of its citizens by facilitating a decent standard of living and quality of life, and whereas the impending increase in utility rates and the imminent imposition of property taxes will further escalate the cost of living and the inflation rate, and whereas the consistent increases in fuel prices have further negatively impacted the cost of living, and whereas this government has failed to take proactive measures to cushion the economic fallouts brought about by the escalating prices of essential goods and services, be it resolved that this House call on the government to outline its short, medium, and long-term strategies to systematically reduce the escalating and uncontrollable increase in the price of essential goods and services accessed by the population of Trinidad and Tobago. And be it further resolved that this House call on the government to take the necessary urgent action to immediately remedy the negative effects upon those living below the poverty line. Madam Speaker, the decision to file this motion was driven by extreme suffering, frustration, and hopelessness. Madam Speaker, some people seated on the opposing benches, as you can see, have the opinion that their practices, or let's say modus operandi, are shared or comparable by all political office holders. Madam Speaker, when a motion or other issue is brought up on behalf of the general public, those opposite typically respond with phrases like, "We are playing politics, you are playing politics, you politicizing the issue, you are trying to score political points." In other words, Madam Speaker, they mock, belittle, and literally minimize the legitimate and real complaints, the real experiences and circumstances that the general public faces in this country. Madam Speaker, the filing of this motion was born out of sheer pain, was born out of frustration, was born out of despair, Madam Speaker. You see, Madam, some on the opposite benches are of the belief that their methods is shared or similar to everyone that assumes political office. In other words, Madam Speaker, they trivialize, they demean, and literally pour scorn on legitimate and real grievances, experiences, situations faced by the public at large. Yet I want to counter such critics up front, Madam Speaker, by stating that political representation happens when individuals such as myself speak and fight on behalf of others in the political sphere. Madam Speaker, that is what Shogunas East sent me in this house to do. And I will continue to remind as long as I am in here that I offered myself to the constituents of Shogunas East to represent their interests, to represent their concerns, and to represent their problems. And most of all, to be their long-lasting friend. I asked them to be their advocate, Madam Speaker, and they responded by sending me to the House of Representatives. And I repeat, representatives. Therefore, Madam Speaker, I can assure you as well, Madam Speaker, that this is one MP who does not intend to deviate from my elected responsibility. And that is to represent my constituents and by extension, the country of Trinidad and Tobago without fear or favor. Madam Speaker, in addition to being represented in my motion, recent headlines that have blasted the nation with information on growing food prices in Trinidad and Tobago include the following, and I would like to share some of those with you. Madam Speaker, headlines such as 2022 closes off with record high food prices / shortages. Headlines such as food prices increased by 9.7% in 2 years. Headlines such as Chamber Head urges government to control surging food prices. Madam Speaker, headlines such as no ease, food prices expected to remain high. And headlines such as teachers save the day for hungry students. Madam Speaker, The motion's first paragraph, paragraph 1, discusses the responsibility of the government, or more generally, what is its only or overriding goal. Madam Speaker, their method makes it clear that they are disengaged. Madam Speaker, let me enunciate on what are their duties, just like any other government globally. Their duties are to provide the parameters for everyday behavior of citizens. Duties are to protect them from outside interference, both domestically and externally. And Madam Speaker, I want us all to listen to this one carefully. Yes, of course, citizens must play their part, but it is the duty of the government to provide for their happiness and their well-being. Madam Speaker, at this given moment, can any of us in this chamber honestly believe we are happy in this country? Can we honestly believe that we are happy in this country when single mothers cannot purchase baby formula because of skyrocketing prices? Madam Speaker, can we honestly believe that we are happy in this country when most children are attending school without proper nutritional support or school supplies? Madam Speaker, can we honestly believe we are happy in this country when pensioners cannot partake of a nutritionally sound meal? Madam Speaker, can we believe we are happy when families are constantly facing threats of eviction due to their inability to meet rental payments? Madam Speaker, can we believe we are happy in this country when the old and infirmed cannot purchase much needed medical supplies nor consume dietary requisite meals as dictated by their health providers? Madam Speaker, can we believe we are happy? Those who believe that this motion seeks to trivialize and politicize the terrible living standards that currently obtains in this country, I want to take this opportunity, Madam Speaker, to share with you some of the daily experiences faced by citizens. Because if we do not believe us as the opposition, when we hear it from the people themselves, we have no choice but to believe it. Madam Speaker, so if you don't believe us, hear the people. And I refer to an Express article headlined, "Public Laments Madness Over Cost of Living." And I quote, "At the San Juan market, vendor Roger Jagoin said, 'What about poor people? It costs about $100 to make a pot of callaloo. People can't afford a whole cabbage at $30. I have to cut a cabbage in 4 pieces and sell it at $12 a piece. People come to the market and they don't know how to spend their money. They have to cut and cut to make ends meet.'" And I quote again, "I wonder if Imbert knows how poor people are suffering." Madam Speaker,
Member, we refer to members in this House either by their portfolio or the constituency. I remind members, when you quote, you adopt the language of. So while you're quoting, you will have to adjust to meet the requirements of the standing order. So I'll ask you to withdraw that and say it in the way that is acceptable according to our standing order.
Sure, Madam Speaker, and I withdraw and I'll say it in the appropriate way. And I quote, "I wonder if," and they refer to the honorable member, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Imbert, knows how poor people are suffering. Madam Speaker, Aruka resident Ian Macaulay, 67, added, "I don't have any small children, but I have to help my grandchildren. When I go to the grocery, I am appalled at the increase in food prices. I wonder how people with 2 and 3 children are making out." Shaking his head, he added, "During the 70s, the PNM said they had enough money to give everybody $1 million. Look at how people take our money to Panama. Now we have to suffer. Trinidad used to be a paradise. It's terrible." Madam Speaker, those are the voices of the people of this country. Madam Speaker, I strongly advise those opposite who disagree to read this original article, since regardless of how they may interpret the terminology, the people have expressed their views there. Madam Speaker, they have also sent a loud and clear message that starting from the local government election, honorable members of the government bench, the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister would feel the brunt of their anger and discontent. Madam Speaker, as I close on the opening paragraph 1, I want to refer to the debilitating effects on the well-being of the citizens of the country. And I want to refer to a piece by Dr. Margaret Naked Chatur, who spoke on increased cost of living and the effect on mental well-being rather. And Madam Speaker, she's a psychologist, educator, and team lead. And what she said made a lot of sense and actually speaks to the reality of what our citizens are facing in this country. And she said, not all of us can swipe a card easily. Reality, Madam Speaker. Not all of us can swipe a card easily at the supermarket to pay for groceries. Because in reality, Madam Speaker, some of us are checking by the counter and we have to put back on the shelves. Madam Speaker, she said, not all of us are able to put three square meals on the table to feed our families on a daily basis. Further, Madam Speaker, she stated, many job losses and pay cuts in salaries for men and women who have had to make major adjustments to their lifestyles and minimize their eating choices and expenses. What may seem like no big thing for some has become a constant worry, shame, and embarrassment for many. When the money is gone and the month has just begun, Madam Speaker, the reality of what is facing our citizens. Some citizens at the beginning of the month, the first week, their salary is done. It's finished. They can't see it. She also stated, when the money is gone and when the cost of living rise faster than our wages, more people will experience financial difficulties, and money worries will of course impact mental health in a serious and debilitating way. Madam Speaker, this is the reality, and then we ask ourselves, why domestic violence? Why child abuse? Madam Speaker, this is the reality. Unlike some, Madam Speaker, who claim that we should be riding bicycle. Madam Speaker, unlike some who claim we should be riding bicycle and who the public notices filling luxurious automobile in Santa Cruz, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when this piece by Dr. Chatur is summarized, It clearly demonstrates that everyone in the society is suffering from burnout arising from the emptying and, let's say, the diminishing of all of our pockets, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I now proceed to paragraph 2 of my motion, which focuses on the effects of the planned increase in utility rates, including electricity. Or, Madam Speaker, as an elderly woman who was crying and shaking recently in my office and asked me, just like this, she asked me, Madam Speaker, girl, how I gonna make out when the current bill go up? And Madam Speaker, that's just the reality of many persons. Those are the questions many persons are asking in this country. Madam Speaker, you are not prepared for this kind of gut-wrenching experience. But when it comes to standing up for others, you have no choice but to persevere, Madam Speaker. And we on this side will continue to stand up for these people who are our citizens. Madam Speaker, I want to share a thought with you. It is not an easy task, rather, to listen to aged and poor people when they are betrayed by the system and you are helpless to provide support and solutions to their plight. It is a real challenge to deal with what I describe as helplessness. Madam Speaker, the RIC proposes an increase of 15% to 64% for residential customers, depending on your consumption rate. However, before I delve further, Madam Speaker, apart from diminishing your pockets, they will have to pay more for goods and services. They compound this with pure deceit by advocating.
I'll ask you to kindly withdraw that word.
Madam Speaker, I withdraw that word. But Madam Speaker, and I say it in another way, they compound this with a feeling of these citizens wanting to know, where do I move next? How are these people treating me this way? By advocating a monthly billing versus the existing bi-monthly billing. Madam Speaker, this is the telltale sign of a swindle. This is a sign of...
I ask you to withdraw that word.
Madam Speaker, I withdraw that word, and I say, this is a telltale sign of a hoodwinking act committed against society. And Madam Speaker, this is an obvious attempt to disarm a population that is already bruised and confused into thinking that a monthly billing does not necessarily mean higher charges. Madam Speaker, let's be honest. Let's be honest with ourselves as representatives. Let us put ourselves in the feet of our citizens, in the shoes of our citizens, sorry. Let's be honest. If you have to pay increases, 1 month billing or 2 month billing won't protect you from them. So why are we treating our citizens this way? Why this treatment towards our population that is already in ruins, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, let me for argument's sake surmise that commercial and industrial operators are in a position to absorb this increase, despite fully aware that such increases will ultimately be passed on to the customers of their product and services, so therefore they are not in a loss-loss situation. Let us for argument's sake say that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the fact of the matter are, residents, households, and families are already overburdened with increased cost of living. Therefore, Madam Speaker, electricity rate increase will only bring greater hardship to an already crippled society. Madam Speaker, my colleagues will expand and articulate the true and real impact of this phenomenon on utility rates. However, Madam Speaker, the implantations of this particular hike are all articulated in an article. And I want to refer a bit to the words of the Chief Executive Officer of NFM, National Flour Mills. And this article expressed as February 6, 2023, headlined, "If electricity goes up, flour may follow." Madam Speaker, consumers, and I quote, consumers could find themselves paying higher prices for flour, for cooking oil, and even animal feed due to the proposed increase in electricity prices. Madam Speaker, the CEO of National Flour Mills, Ian Mitchell, told the Express that the majority state-owned company ran some numbers and the proposed rate hike will have a significant impact on its costs. It is going to be quite significant. The question is going to be, can we absorb it? And that is the question on everyone's mind in this country. Madam Speaker, already we have started looking at what the approach should be to allow us to mitigate and absorb those costs without passing them on, said Mitchell. Madam Speaker, the government's, I now move to property tax. Madam Speaker, the government's decision to introduce the property tax in the midst of an almost destroyed economy, in the midst of rampant unemployment and astronomical poverty reaching historical levels, is clearly the manifestation of a regime's desperation to raise revenue despite the consequences and hardship on the citizenry. Madam Speaker, I want to deal a little bit again with reality throughout, and I will do so throughout my presentation. Madam, there are persons living in houses to which at this very moment they can barely pay their mortgage. And I'm sure every MP sitting in this house face constituents on their office days who are facing these types of problems. Madam Speaker, imagine with no assistance from the government, someone who is left a house by their parents, who over an inordinate number of years, block by block, and we know how things go. One pallet this month, 2 pallets next 2 months, and that's how persons bill when we say block by block. With the help of family and friends, would have constructed a home. Madam Speaker, the government, which did not help at all, is now demanding your property tax. Madam Speaker, we on this side ask, where is the fairness? Where is the equity? Where is the justification for this heartless imposition of this property tax? Madam Speaker, the audacity of the government demanding income from your asset. Madam Speaker, remember when I coined the phrase in this house? I'm sure you would remember this. I used it a couple times in a few presentations, where I stated, people in this country are becoming income poor and facing asset risk. And I stand by that. Nothing better describes this current situation, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, property tax would only serve to further destabilize the economy at this time and also place additional increases in the cost of living in already depressed circumstances. Madam Speaker, this imposition would further contribute to increased unemployment levels and continued reduced business activities. Madam Speaker, my colleagues would expand on this dagger called property tax, which has been stuck in the heart of the population simply because they scrimped and saved to acquire a house, and now they are punished for their thriftiness. Madam Speaker, all in all, the government wants you to be exposed to elements. Rain must wet you and sun must burn you. Then they will sit back and advise you to ride a bicycle, use a coal pot, and eat macaroni pie less often, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, imagine that. This regime even attacks what is considered a staple in our Sunday lunch. Even our food culture is under threat, not just our standard of living. Madam Speaker, I ask, how do they sleep at night, knowing the immense pain and suffering that they have imposed on this fragile population through their inefficiencies, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, since this government assumed office, they have a fixation on increasing fuel prices. You see, Madam Speaker, their solution to financial management is to tax, and increase fuel prices. Madam Speaker, let me look at what they have done since assuming office relative to the prices for super gasoline, which is a fuel normally used by the average citizen. And I want to refer to a piece by Jason Alexander in June 2022. And the history of these prices, Madam Speaker, and I state, October 5th, 2015, super gasoline, TT, $3.11 per liter. April 8, 2016, TT, $3.58 per liter. October 2017, TT, $3.97 per liter. October 1st, 2018, TT $4.97 per liter. And April 19, 2022, TT $5.97 per liter. Madam Speaker, everybody knows that increases in the cost of transportation via fuel hikes will ultimately result in the increased cost of living. Every first-term economic or management student knows this, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to look back a little at the father of the PNM, Dr. Eric Williams. Madam Speaker, when he conceptualized the fuel subsidy, he saw it as an equalizing tool, wherein this initiative, allowing for every citizen to at least benefit from the energy windfall via fuel or electricity. Madam Speaker, whilst not the greatest mechanism for sharing the national pie, people at least got the crumb of the crumbs. But the current regime is so callous that they won't even allow the poor that bit of support or even the crumb, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it boils down to this government has totally disregarded the blood, the sweat, the tears and efforts of the poor and vulnerable in this country. It boils down to where they have totally condemned the poor and vulnerable to further misery with a colossal albatross, an oversized burden on their backs, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, despite all these influencing and deleterious factors which are further occasioning economic harm to the population, this regime continues to meander along creating blunder after blunder, which the already burdened society will inevitably have to ultimately foot the bill. And I just say this, watch out for Nelson Gate. And I move on, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when they speak they will advance that they have removed VAT. They have removed value-added tax on some food items, given a one-off fuel grant to pensioners. They would say that, Madam Speaker. They have given a one-off fuel grant to pensioners and recipients of social services grants. But, Madam Speaker, in reality, ask any one of them on the government bench if they have spoken to the citizens. And, Madam Speaker, in reality, ask any one of them, meaning the recipients, whether their lives improved or advanced by this one-off grant. Madam Speaker, this ploy did not provide any sustaining effect. When you are planning mechanisms such as this, relief mechanisms, of course you look at the sustainable aspect of it. And this ploy, of course, did not provide any sustaining effect on their cost of living, nor reduced food prices for the citizens who would have been in receipt of those grants. Madam Speaker, I now look a little bit at the Minister of Trade and Industry as it relates to food prices. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Trade and Industry of this government of Trinidad and Tobago has went on to warn people to exercise caution Madam Speaker, when using their purchasing power. Can you imagine that, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, nonetheless, even the Ministry of Trade and Industry admitted that customers continue to face increased costs, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if the government mentioned a number of measures in this article, but then admits that they aren't having a big impact, Madam Speaker, we have to ask, what is next in this country? Madam Speaker, I refer to a Newsday article when I'm speaking here, January 18, 2023, where the Trade Minister urges Trinidad and Tobago to shop smarter as food prices too high, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I don't want to say what a joke, but what an insult to our citizens of this country. Madam Speaker, Loop News, March 1st, 2023. Ministry of Trade and Industry notes rising food prices and tells the public to shop wisely, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, wisely? Madam Speaker, let them go to the supermarkets in this country and see how people picking up in local parlance, chirrup, chirrup. Madam Speaker, chirrup, chirrup. You hear them when you are in the supermarket, when they bounce me up, Madam Speaker. Oh God, girl, you know grocery prices real high. Real high. When we will get this government out of power? Madam Speaker, the truth and the fact of the matter is the government must get serious. The government must realize that radical measures are required to combat escalating food prices in this country. Madam Speaker, finally, the nation is calling on the government through this motion to outline the short-term strategies, whether by, Madam Speaker, reversing the fuel hike to pre-budget figures, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the nation is calling on the government through this motion to outline the short-term strategies, whether by postponing the impending utility rate increase until the citizens' economic plight is addressed. Madam Speaker, the nation is calling for short-term strategies through this motion, whether by lowering or removing VAT on all foodstuff, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and I have to remind them that under the Honorable Member for Siparia, under her regime, VAT was removed from basically all food items in this country. Madam Speaker, The nation, through this motion, is also calling for short-term strategies, whether by lowering import duties and VAT on pharmaceutical and medical supplies. You would hear it from our senior citizens. All of my pension going in medication. And that is the reality, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me highlight some medium-term measures, as my motion states. Some medium-term measures, whether it be provision of fiscal incentives of food companies locally, Madam Speaker, whether it be, Madam Speaker, revitalizing and overhauling the entire agricultural sector. And when I speak of the agricultural sector, why don't we look at cultivating and placing all arable lands into production, Madam Speaker? Our farmers are screaming, our farmers are pleading. Why don't we look at incentivizing our farmers? Madam Speaker, I looked at you recently at a particular meeting. Madam Speaker, when it comes to some medium-term measures, we must, and I speak about our farmers, address predial larceny, and my colleagues will expand on this. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Agriculture, which ought to be the beacon in this food crisis fight, remains stagnated, Madam Speaker, devoid of direction, bereft of ideas, saddled with incompetency, leaderless, clueless, Madam Speaker. Whilst our population continue to starve and the food import bill remains astronomically high in our country. Madam Speaker, I'm sure we all remember the food box program, which was helping the poor and vulnerable, and it was stopped. Remember, they said in a short space of time, they are reviewing this, and in a short space of time, they will bring forth a plan, and that plan was supposed to be revealed. Madam Speaker, nothing to date. Madam Speaker, I want to quickly look at some long-term measures. Madam Speaker, in terms of long-term measures, what is the mechanism to reduce the challenges faced by the business sector? Madam Speaker, what is being done to ease the conduct of business in this country? Are there any plans for new fiscal incentives? Madam Speaker, what about collaboration? Are there any collaborative efforts and partnering efforts with foreign investors, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, the nation is yearning for urgent relief. And those in Chaguanas East and all other constituencies in Trinidad and Tobago are demanding some form of intervention. And I intend to represent their concerns through this motion. Madam Speaker, the government can no longer sit idly whilst the nation plunges into poverty, whilst our nation is unable to eat, with alarming increases in destitution. Madam Speaker, the only hope and salvation resides in the removal of this uncaring, blinkered regime who smiles and ridicules the population because of their hardship. Madam Speaker, I challenge them. They will come here to give you flowery figures today and tell you we did this and we did that. But Madam Speaker, I want to quote, Madam Speaker, some of them very well know that everything that I'm speaking here today is the truth. Madam Speaker, I want to quote, and the member for Toko Sangre Grande, Poverty in a Time of COVID, Daily Express, October 30th, 2020. I know of their struggles. No money, no income. I know about the daily crisis some people face. Sitting on the government bench, Madam Speaker, what are you saying or doing among your peers? Madam Speaker, that was 2020. We are now in 2023. What are you doing or saying among your peers? Madam Speaker, How many more hampers can we as MPs give and provide to our constituents? Madam Speaker, as an MP, I can tell you, I am always looking for ideas, and sometimes I feel as though I am running out of ideas, but I can stand proud to say I try my very best, but it is also hard. Madam Speaker, do you remember income support grant? Madam Speaker, do you remember food support grant? Madam Speaker, do you remember salary relief grant? And I speak poverty in a time of COVID. Madam Speaker, to date, people in this country are awaiting phase 1 payments. So we cannot pay phase 1 payments, but we will come here today to say that we are doing all that is good and well to protect the vulnerable in this country. Madam Speaker, I take this opportunity to say to the government, pay these people quickly. Madam Speaker, some persons are banking on that. Some persons are awaiting that. Some persons, if they get that today, they will head straight to the grocery to make a monthly grocery to feed their families. Madam Speaker, as I close, the Stardley treatment must cease, and this motion is but the first step towards the attainment of that noble goal. Madam Speaker, that noble goal. Madam Speaker, we on this side, the bench of the UNC, I say we will continue to fight for you, the members of this population. We will continue to fight for your bread and butter. Madam Speaker, we will continue to do all that it takes to state the wrong and recommend the best for our citizens of this country. Madam Speaker, I want to say to you, it will fix, you know. It will fix. We on this side are on the road to victory, Madam Speaker. Their time is short and our time is near, Madam Speaker. At this time, with those few words, I beg to move.
Yes, Member for Orputres.
Madam Speaker, it is my honor to second this motion. And I reserve the right to speak thereafter.
Honorable members, the motion being seconded, I shall now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that this House call on the government to outline its short, medium, and long-term strategies to systematically reduce the escalating and uncontrollable increase in the price of essential goods and services accessed by the population of Trinidad and Tobago. Be it further resolved that this House call on the government to take the necessary urgent action to immediately remedy the negative effects upon those living below the poverty line. Minister of Public Utilities.
Thank you very much,